The fight gloves are on. UFC picks coming your way. We have got a great card coming up this weekend. UFC on Fox 2, a free fight card that's going to be on Fox TV, every station. Even I'm Canadian and I'm going to get it. Time to talk about the fights that's coming up this weekend. Got a full card for you. We are going to be starting on the undercard, a middleweight matchup between Chris Camozzi and Dustin Jacoby, or Jacoby, or however you pronounce it. Camozzi's 15-5. He's 2-2 in the UFC. He was a cast member on The Ultimate Fighter Season 11. He's lost his last two in the UFC to Kyle Noke and I believe it's, what do I have here, Francis Carmont, or Carmont, whatever. Dustin Jacoby, 6-1 on his career, 0-1 in the UFC. In his UFC debut, he lost a fight to Starks. I'm going to have to go with the experience edge in this one. I got Chris Camozzi winning this fight by decision. Just got to go with the experience factor in it, and Camozzi basically fighting for his UFC career. I always like to give it to a guy that I know is fighting to avoid that third strike. Next fight on the card, heavyweight fight between Joey Beltran and LeVar Johnson. Joey Beltran is 13-6, 3-3 in the UFC. In the UFC, though, he's lost 3 of his last 4. And his only UFC win is over Aaron Rosa, which is not exactly all that impressive of a win. LeVar Johnson, 15-5 on his career, is going to be making his UFC debut, coming over from Strikeforce. He also fought for the WEC for quite some time. He lost his last 2 fights in Strikeforce, but is coming over because of course, Strikeforce dissolving their heavyweight division. I've got LeVar Johnson in this fight. I could see the fight going to a decision, but I'm going to call Johnson by knockout. Next fight on the card, a lightweight fight between Michael Johnson and Shane Roller. Michael Johnson, 9-6 on his career, 1-2 in the UFC, was a cast member on The Ultimate Fighter Season 12, was the runner-up that year, actually, losing in the finale of that show to Jonathan Brookins. Shane Roller, 10-5 on his career, 1-2 in the UFC. He's lost his... he's lost his last 2 fights in the UFC. Lost those fights to Melvin Guillard and TJ Grant. He's not the only guy on this card that's lost a fight recently to Melvin Guillard. In this fight, I gotta have Shane Roller. 5 of Michael Johnson's 6 career losses have come by submission, and that's where the majority of Shane Roller's wins have come from. So I think if Roller can take the fight to the ground, that he is going to submit Michael Johnson, and that could quite possibly be Michael Johnson's last fight in the UFC. Moving on, featherweight fight between Charles Oliveira and Eric Wisely. If you haven't heard of Eric Wisely, of course you can be forgiven pretty much. Charles Oliveira, 14-2-1 on his career, 2-2-1 in the UFC. In the UFC, he's beaten Darren Elkins and Efren Escudero. He's lost fights to Jim Miller and Cowboy Cerrone. He also had that fight that was ruled a no contest after the illegal knee by... in a fight with another guy that's on this card, Nick Lentz, and we'll get to his fight in a little bit. That was originally ruled a win for Charles Oliveira, but was later called back by the Athletic Commission to a no contest. I've got Charles Oliveira in this fight. Sorry. Maybe I should tell you a little bit about Eric Wisely first. Eric Wisely, 19-6 on his career, making his UFC debut. He's won 5 of his last 6 fights. His only other loss, though, his only loss in that time was his one and only Strikeforce fight against Pat Healy. I'm going with Charles Oliveira in this fight by either a knockout or submission. I do think he's going to finish the fight. Wisely... he has a lot of fight experience, but he doesn't have any experience really on this stage, and once again, I think the jitters are going to get to him, and Charles Oliveira is a monster, and I think that's going to continue. Another featherweight fight, we've got Cub Swanson against George Roop. Cub Swanson, 15-5 on his career, 0-1 in the UFC. It's interesting to think Cub Swanson's only had one UFC fight, but anyways, Swanson had 8 fights in the WEC. He was 5-3 in that time, but his 3 losses all came against top competition. The losses came against Jens Pulver, Chad Mendes, and Jose Aldo. So all of those losses come against obviously top competition. George Roop, 12-8 on his career, 2-4 in the UFC. His only notable win in the UFC was against Josh Grisby. So it's like, okay, it's not exactly a bad win, but it's not a great win either. He also suffered recent losses to Mark Hominick and Hatsu Hayoki. I think this one's going to be pretty much all Cub Swanson. I don't have any faith whatsoever in George Roop. I could see Swanson maybe submitting him. He's got a number of submission wins in his career. I think more than likely it's going to go to a decision. So I've got Cub Swanson probably by decision. Next fight is a heavyweight fight between Mike Russo and John Olav Ainamo. John Olav Ainamo, of course, is a Team Golden Glory member. Mike Russo, 14-1 on his career, 3-0 in the UFC. He's beaten McCulley, Duffy, and Madsen in the UFC. His only career loss coming by submission to Sergey Haratonov in Pride. John Olav Ainamo, MMA career 6-2. Lost his only UFC fight, so he's 0-1 in the UFC. That was a loss to Dave Herman. His only other career loss was also a loss in Pride, and that came to Fabricio Verdun in 2006. I think this is going to be a close fight. They're both ground guys. They're both guys that prefer to win by submission. I'm going to go with John Olav Ainamo. I think Ainamo this fight's more than likely going to go to a decision. Ainamo has the ability, of course, to submit him. I think, if I have this correct, Ainamo is the only guy in the history of the Abu Dhabi Championships to beat Roger Gracie. So, I mean, Ainamo's ground skills, nobody can question Ainamo's ground skills. So I think he's got a chance to submit him. I think more than likely the fight will probably go to a decision. But, no, you know what? The hell with it. My pick, John Olav Ainamo by submission. I'm going to pick him to finish the fight. The hell with it. Next fight, move up to the lightweight division. Evan Dunham and Nick Lentz. And Nick Lentz was, again, as I said, the other guy that was involved in that Charles Oliveira illegal knee that ended up being a no contest. Evan Dunham, 12-2 in his career, 5-2 in the UFC, so has a lot of UFC experience. He recently beat Shamar Bailey to break his. He had a little mini 2-fight losing streak there, where he lost to Sean Shirk and Melvin Guillard, and taking on Nick Lentz. And Nick Lentz has a lot of fight experience. He's 21-4-2-1 in his fight career. He's 5-1, 1-1 in the UFC. His only UFC loss came to Mark Bocek in his last fight. This is going to be a tough fight. This is a tough fight to call because I like both of these guys. They've both got a lot of experience in the cage. They're both really good fighters with really good records. I'm going to go with Nick Lentz in a razor-thin decision, possibly even a split decision. That's how close I think this fight's going to be. I think these guys match up on the ground and standing up. They're pretty well equals. I just think Lentz will pull out a razor-thin decision victory. Speaking of decisions, it's a Demian Maia fight. At middleweight, Demian Maia and Chris Weidman. Originally, Maia was supposed to be fighting Michael Bisping. Of course, that stuff all got changed around when Mark Munoz got injured. So Demian Maia and Chris Weidman. Maia 16-3, overall MMA record, 9-3 in the UFC. Since he lost the fight to Anderson Silva, that fucking debacle down in Abu Dhabi, he's 3-1 since that loss. He's beaten George Santiago, Kendall Grove, and Mario Miranda, which are all, all solid wins. Chris Weidman is an undefeated fighter at 7-0. He's 3-0 in the UFC. Has UFC wins over Alessio Sakara, Jesse Bongfeldt, and who else? Filthy Tom Lawler. Has won 2 straight fights by submission. So I think this is going to be a fight that's going to end up, at some point or another, it's going to end up on the ground. I just think this is a bit too big of a step up in competition for Weidman. And I expect Damian Maia to win this fight by decision. I think it's going to go the full length, and I think Damian Maia is going to come out on top. The other main event, of course, this is the triple header of main events now. These are the only 3 fights that are actually for sure going to get shown on Fox. I'm sure they'll show other fights as well, but these are the only 3 fights that are for sure going to get shown on Fox. The Maia-Weidman fight and the next 2. Chael Sonnen against Michael Bisping at middleweight. It's a middleweight title eliminator fight. Winner of this fight will be the next guy to challenge Anderson Silva. Chael Sonnen, 26-11 in his MMA career. He's 4-2 in the UFC. Came back in his last fight to beat Brian Stann very, very convincingly. That was after a year off because of the failed drug test that he had after his first fight with Anderson Silva. And going up against Michael Bisping, and fuck, I hate Michael Bisping. Bisping, 22-3 in his MMA career, 12-3 in the UFC. He's on a 4-fight win streak. His last fight against a great wrestler, a guy that has really high-quality wrestling skills, was the start of that 4-fight win streak when he beat Dan Miller. That was back in 2010. Like I say, this is hard for me to be objective over because I fucking hate Michael Bisping so much. The guy's just a fucking tool. But anyways, I did pick Chael Sonnen to win this fight. I think he's going to win the fight by decision. I just think that's Chael Sonnen. Sonnen's on a mission. That he legitimately thinks he won that fight with Anderson Silva, and he is going to do anything to get it back. I didn't think Sonnen was going to beat Stan, but he came out and he dominated Stan, and I just think Michael Bisping doesn't have the wrestling to keep up with Sonnen and the pace that Sonnen cuts. So I've got Chael Sonnen by decision. And in the main event, light heavyweight fight between Rashad Evans and Phil Davis. This is a light heavyweight title eliminator. So the winner of this fight should be the next guy in line to get a shot at Johnny Bones. Rashad Evans, another guy that I don't like. So it's really hard to be objective. 16-1-1 in his MMA career, 11-1-1 in the UFC. He's a former champ at this weight class. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He's a good fighter. I just don't like him. I think he's a punk. I think he ducked Shogun when Shogun had the belt. I legitimately think he faked an injury or intentionally got himself injured just to not have to fight Shogun, but that's, of course, an unpopular opinion, but it's mine. So we got Rashad Evans going up against Phil Davis. Phil Davis, 9-0, undefeated. Undefeated 5-0 in the UFC. He's beaten Little Nog. He's beaten Gustafsson. He's beaten Tim Boetsch. He's beaten Brian Stann. I'm going with Phil Davis. It's an unpopular pick because everybody is all over Rashad's Jimmy. I'm not. I'm picking Phil Davis to win this. I actually think Davis has the stuff on the ground to submit Rashad Evans, but Rashad's never been submitted, so it's hard to make a pick. I'm going to be safe, and I'm going to pick a decision, even though I'm guessing because it's the main event fight, it's going to be a 5-round fight. But I'm still going to pick Phil Davis to win the fight by decision. If it has to go all 5 rounds, it has to go all 5 rounds, but I still think it's going to be by decision. So there we go. I'll run down my picks for you one more time. I've got Kamotsi to beat Jacoby. I've got LeVar Johnson to beat Joey Beltran. I've got Shane Roller to beat Michael Johnson. I've got Charles Oliveira to beat Eric Wisely. I've got Cub Swanson beating George Roop. John Olavinamo beating Mike Russo. I've got Nick Lentz beating Evan Dunham. I've got Damian Maia beating Chris Weidman. I've got Chael Sonnen beating Michael Bisping. And in the main event, sorry about my phone there, I've got Phil Davis beating Rashad Evans. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, my UFC picks for UFC on Fox 2. See ya.